At my birthday party, my mom murmured something into my dad's ear. I caught the change in his eyes before I could respond. The very next instant, his push sent me slamming to the floor. Dazed, I stayed there as they turned to walk away, until a slow chuckle escaped my mouth. They froze. His face lost all color. Your adoptive father, in a moment of pure, shocking violence, shoves you to the ground at your own birthday party. Now, imagine that wasn't the most disturbing part. What if I told you that moment, in front of 127 of Boston's elite, was the calculated trigger for the complete annihilation of their multi-billion-dollar empire? The Jenkins estate in Beacon Hill wasn't just a house. It was a limestone monument to generations of old money, each portrait of a stern industrialist judging you from the gilded walls. For 25 years, this opulent cage had been my home, the air within it thick with a pretense of familial warmth that always felt paper-thin. My adoptive parents, Eleanor and Arthur Jenkins, had snatched me from the ruins of my biological parents' car crash when I was just 4 years old. "She's our little charity project," Eleanor would purr at every high society gala, her perfectly manicured hand resting on my shoulder, feeling less like a comforting touch and more like a shackle. "We saved her from the foster system, didn't we, dear?" I'd learned to perform, to smile on cue, playing the role of the grateful orphan while Boston's elite gushed over the Jenkins' supposed generosity. What they didn't see were the locked doors, the forced signatures on documents I was never allowed to read, the systematic erasure of my true identity. For a quarter century, I was their living tax deduction, their shiny proof of humanitarian virtue. Every charity board in the city knew the heartwarming tale, how the Jenkins had taken in a traumatized child, provided the best education, introduced her to society. Harvard Law School, they'd proudly remind everyone, as if my achievements were somehow their own creation. But behind the mansion's imposing oak doors, I was less than staff. Staff got paid. Staff could quit. I was inventory, a high-value asset to be managed, controlled, and eventually liquidated. The chilling thought settled deep in my gut. The first tremor, the first sign something truly sinister was at play, came during my second year at Morrison and Associates. I'd finally gotten around to reviewing my trust fund statements, something Eleanor had always insisted on handling to spare me the burden when I spotted them, discrepancies. Tiny at first, a few $1,000s here, a strange transfer there. Then I found the pattern. Over 4 years, a staggering $47 million had been systematically siphoned from the trust my biological parents, Emily and William Brennan, had left me. Money that, according to their will, should have been mine at 25. Money that had simply vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Family doesn't question family, Arthur had barked when I'd timidly tried to inquire about it. "Just sign here, Aubrey. Trust us." But trust, I was rapidly learning, was a luxury I could no longer afford. The true, terrifying scale of their theft became horrifyingly clear during a late night at my law firm. I'd been meticulously tracing the money transfers, following paper trails that led to 12 different shell companies, all registered in Delaware, all sporting innocent names like Beacon Holdings LLC and Heritage Investment Partners. "Just sign here, Aubrey. No need to read everything." Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory as I stared at my own signature on documents I'd never knowingly seen before. Documents authorizing the transfer of millions from my trust into accounts I didn't control. They'd been drugging me. Small, insidious doses of sedatives in my morning coffee on signing days, just enough to make me compliant, my memory foggy. I'd always blamed it on stress from law school, from work, but the pattern was too perfect. Every signing day, followed by profound exhaustion and gaping memory blinks. My salary at Morrison and Associates, $180,000 a year, respectable for a fourth-year associate, was meticulously monitored. Direct deposit into an account Eleanor had helped me set up. Credit cards she reviewed monthly for my protection. Even my work bonuses mysteriously evaporated into family investments I never saw returns from. The cruelest part? They made me thank them for it. "We're teaching you financial responsibility," Arthur would lecture, dissecting my expense reports as if I were a common criminal. Meanwhile, They were stealing millions, using my money to fund their opulent lifestyle, while keeping me utterly dependent on their approval for a $20 lunch. That night, I unearthed something even more damning. The money wasn't just stolen, it was being laundered through political campaigns. 3 state senators, Bennett, Campbell, and Peterson, and 2 federal judges, Maxwell and Harrison, all receiving lavish donations from companies funded entirely by my inheritance. My parents hadn't just left me money. They'd left me evidence of a vast conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of Boston's power structure. But I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that would stand up in court and, just as crucially, in the court of public opinion. That's when I finally understood. If I wanted to escape, I'd have to play a much longer, much more dangerous game than they could ever anticipate from their grateful little charity case. The Massachusetts Bar Association conference 4 years ago should have been just another mind-numbing networking obligation. 300 lawyers in a stuffy ballroom, making forced small talk over rubber chicken and weak coffee. But that's where I met Liam Riley. He wasn't the type to work the room. Instead, he stood by the windows, watching the crowd with the focused intensity of someone reading a chessboard 3 moves ahead. "You're the Jenkins foster daughter," he stated, not asked, when I approached. "The one they parade around at charity events." "Adopted daughter," I corrected automatically, the rehearsed response spilling out. His eyes, sharp and knowing, narrowed. "Is that what you tell yourself? Or what they tell you to say?" Something in his tone made me truly look at him. He was 62, built like a boxer who'd somehow gone to Yale, with scars on his knuckles that hinted his education hadn't all come from books. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "The micro-expressions when they mention your name. The way you flinch when Eleanor touches you. The practiced smile that never quite reaches your eyes." My chest tightened. 25 years of perfect performance, and this stranger had seen right through it in minutes. "If you ever want to talk," he slipped me his card, "about anything, legal matters or otherwise." That night, I did something I'd never dared to do before. I called him. "First rule," Liam said when we met at a greasy diner in Southie, miles away from Beacon Hill's watchful eyes. "If you want to escape them, you need evidence. Not suspicions, not feelings. Evidence that will hold up in federal court." He taught me about RICO statutes, about financial forensics, about the crushing difference between civil and criminal liability. But most importantly, he gave me something I'd never truly had, an ally. Someone who saw the Jenkins for what they truly were. "They're going to escalate when they sense you pulling away," he warned. "People like them always do. So when they do, and they will, you need to be ready. To document everything." That's when he handed me the first recording device. Tiny, magnetic, designed to look like a button. Every conversation, every threat, every forced signature. "You're building a case, Aubrey. And when you're ready, we're going to burn their whole kingdom down." For the first time in my life, I had hope. And a plan. The full, terrifying scope of what I stood to lose became crystal clear 6 months into building my case. Liam had connected me with an off-the-books forensic accountant, a quiet woman who traced money flows through encrypted channels the Jenkins thought were invisible. $47 million, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table in a bustling Chinatown restaurant. Withdrawn over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. Small enough to avoid federal reporting requirements, frequent enough to drain you dry. But it wasn't just theft. The money had been laundered through a network that made my stomach churn. 3 state senators, Bennett, Campbell, and Peterson, had received $2.3 million each through consulting fees from companies that existed only on paper, companies funded entirely by my inheritance. "There's more," the accountant continued. "Federal judges Maxwell and Harrison. They've been getting quarterly payments through a real estate investment trust. Your money bought their vacation homes in the vineyard." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about my trust fund. It was about purchased influence at every single level of Massachusetts government. My parents' money, meant to secure my future, had instead built a sprawling corruption network that controlled courts, legislation, and law enforcement. But then came the kicker. Federal RICO statutes had a 5-year limit. In 72 hours, the first transactions would age out of the prosecution range. Every day I waited, another piece of evidence became legally worthless. If you don't file by Monday, Liam had warned, you lose $8 million worth of claims. By December, that number hits $20 million. The Jenkins must have known. That's why Eleanor had been pushing so hard lately, insisting I sign new power of attorney documents for estate planning purposes. Then I intercepted an email meant for Arthur. Dr. Hayes, a psychiatrist who had never even examined me, had already prepared commitment papers. The diagnosis: delusional disorder with paranoid features. The recommendation: immediate involuntary commitment for my own safety. She's become obsessed with conspiracy theories about the family finances, the report read. She poses a danger to herself and potentially others. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent. Once that happened, Eleanor would gain full, legal control of whatever remained of my inheritance. My testimony would be worthless. My evidence would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. The commitment hearing was scheduled for November 16th, the day after my birthday party. That's when the horrifying truth hit me: the party wasn't a celebration. It was meant to be my last public appearance as a legally competent adult. Whatever they planned to do there would be witnessed by Boston's most powerful people, all of whom would then readily testify that I'd seemed disturbed or erratic. I had one chance, one night. And if I failed, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose my freedom, my sanity, and any hope of justice. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. Arthur's threats against my legal career weren't empty posturing. He'd already demonstrated his terrifying reach 3 times. Chloe Adams, a paralegal who'd quietly helped me photocopy documents after hours, was fired within 48 hours for performance issues, despite glowing reviews. Noah Miller, a junior associate who'd asked too many questions about the Jenkins accounts, found himself suddenly transferred to the firm's satellite office in Worcester. Mia Davis, who'd offered to testify about witnessing Eleanor forge my signature, received a call from the State Bar about anonymous complaints regarding her professional conduct. One phone call, Arthur had said over dinner last week, carving his steak with surgical precision. That's all it takes. Every managing partner in Boston owes me favors. Every judge golfs at my club. You think that Harvard law degree means something? I can make it worth less than the paper it's printed on. He wasn't bluffing. I'd already been mysteriously passed over for partnership track despite billing more hours than any other fourth-year associate. My name had been removed from a high-profile class action case without explanation. 14 firms, from white shoe establishments to boutique practices, had rejected my applications with identical, chilling language about not being the right fit. The Jenkins' reach extended far beyond Boston. Through their connections, they'd poisoned wells in New York, D.C., even Los Angeles. Email threads I'd managed to hack showed coordinated efforts to blacklist me nationwide. She's unstable, Eleanor had written to the managing partner of Cromwell and Associates. We've tried to help her, but she has paranoid tendencies. Hiring her would be a liability risk. But yesterday, everything shifted. An encrypted email appeared in my personal account from a sender the Jenkins didn't monitor. Special Agent Olivia Reed, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Miss Thompson, we've been investigating irregularities in campaign finance records that trace back to accounts connected to your trust fund. If you have documentation that could assist our investigation, we're prepared to offer witness protection and ensure your professional credentials remain intact, regardless of any retaliation attempts. Time is of the essence. They already knew. The FBI had been building their own case, but they needed an insider. Someone with access to family records, private conversations, internal documents. They needed me. Liam had been right all along. This was bigger than family theft. It was a federal conspiracy case waiting to explode. And I held the detonator. I typed my response carefully. I have 1,147 pages of documentation, 234 audio recordings, and 89 witnesses ready to testify. I can provide everything. Monday morning, November 16th. Her reply came within minutes. Understood. Whatever happens between now and then, document everything. We will be monitoring. The birthday party was tomorrow. The commitment hearing the day after. But now I had federal backup waiting in the wings. The Jenkins thought they were closing a trap. They had no idea they were walking into one. Have you ever been trapped in a situation where standing up meant losing everything, but staying silent meant losing yourself? Drop a comment below about a time you had to choose between safety and truth. Your story matters, and you're not alone in this fight. The dinner before my birthday party was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every word was sharpened to cut. Tomorrow will be special, Aubrey, Eleanor said, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. I'm looking forward to it, I replied, matching her tone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Everyone important will be there. Arthur didn't even glance up from his phone. 127 people, to be exact, Eleanor corrected, her smile sharp as winter. That's very specific, I kept my voice neutral. I like precision, don't you, dear? She purred. I'm learning to appreciate it, I said. Good. Learning is important, she paused, her eyes locking onto mine, while you still can. The threat hung between us like a suspended blade. The Campbells confirmed, Arthur interjected, finally looking up. The senators, too. How wonderful. My fingers instinctively brushed against the tiny recording device in my pocket. They're eager to see you. Eleanor's eyes glittered with malicious delight. To see how you've developed. I'm sure I won't disappoint. No, she said slowly, her gaze chilling. I don't think you will. The photographer will be there at 8, Arthur added. To capture memories? I asked, my voice light. To capture truth, Eleanor replied. We ate in silence for 30 seconds. 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity. Your dress arrived, she finally announced. The blue one from 5 years ago. Waste not, want not. Besides, her smile turned cruel, it's fitting. How so? You'll understand tomorrow. Will I? Oh yes. Clarity is coming, Aubrey. For everyone? Her fork paused midway to her mouth. What does that mean? Nothing. Just agreeing with you. You've been doing a lot of that lately. Arthur's voice was laced with suspicion. I've learned my place. Have you? Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes piercing. And where's that? Wherever you decide it should be. Good girl. The condescension dripped like poison. That's the first smart thing you've said in months. I aim to please. Tomorrow, you'll do more than please. She stood up. You'll perform. Perform one last time for the family. After tomorrow, everything changes, Arthur added, pushing back his chair. Yes, I said quietly, my gaze fixed on Eleanor. Everything. Eleanor froze at the doorway. What was that? I said, yes, I understand. She studied me for a long moment, suspicion warring with triumph in her eyes. Dr. Hayes will be there, she said, almost an afterthought. The psychiatrist. Just a friend, but good to have professional opinions close by. Her smile was pure predator. In case anyone seems disturbed, of course. Safety first. Remember that tomorrow, Aubrey? Safety first. They left me alone with the wreckage of dinner and the crushing weight of what was coming. Alone in my room, I opened my laptop to the encrypted folder Liam had taught me to hide. 1,147 pages of evidence, meticulously organized with the precision of a federal indictment, bank statements, forged signatures, shell company registrations, email threads discussing my management. As if I were livestock. The 234 audio files were backed up across 7 cloud services, each with different trigger conditions. If my phone detected sudden impact, like being shoved to the ground, everything would auto-upload to pre-selected recipients, the FBI, the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, even WikiLeaks. Because why not? Liam called it a dead man switch, though he'd winced at the term. If they get physical, he'd said, the accelerometer in your phone triggers the upload. 10 seconds later, everything goes live. They touch you, they destroy themselves. I'd tested it a dozen times, dropping my phone from different heights, different angles. Each time, the system worked flawlessly. A small notification would appear, emergency protocols activated, files transmitted. But the real beauty was in the timing. The emails were scheduled for 8:47 p.m. tomorrow, precisely when Eleanor planned to make her grand speech about family and charity. Each recipient would get different pieces of the puzzle, ensuring the story couldn't be buried or spun. The Wall Street Journal would receive the financial crimes. The FBI would get the money laundering evidence. The IRS would see 2 decades of tax fraud. Local news would get the juiciest family drama. Social media influencers with millions of followers would receive video clips perfectly sized for viral sharing. I pulled up the metadata from the security cameras I'd had installed in the main hall 2 weeks ago, disguised as routine maintenance. 3 angles, all streaming to off-site servers. Whatever happened tomorrow would be captured in 4K resolution, with timestamp authentication that would hold up in court. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah Green at the Journal. Story ready to run on your signal. Front page, above the fold. Everything was in place. For years of planning condensed into one moment of calculated risk. Tomorrow, they would try to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. Tomorrow, I would let them try. The pattern had been there all along, hidden in 20 years of family videos I'd digitized last month. 6 incidents, same trigger, same horrifying result. Christmas 2018, Eleanor whispered, "Remember your duty, Arthur," when her sister questioned their parenting. Arthur threw a crystal glass against the wall. Thanksgiving 2019, the phrase again, when a reporter asked about irregularities in their charity finances. Arthur grabbed the man's collar, had to be pulled away. The graduation party, the merger celebration, 2 board meetings. Each time, Eleanor deployed those 4 words like launching a missile. And Arthur, reliable as clockwork, would explode into violence. It was conditioning, Pavlovian. 20 years of psychological manipulation that turned a grown man into a weapon, activated by his wife's whisper. I'd found Eleanor's journals in the attic, dated back to when they first adopted me. Arthur requires careful management, she'd written. His temper is useful, but needs direction. The phrase works best when he's already agitated. Public settings increase compliance. His fear of judgment makes him more susceptible to suggestion. She'd been training him like an attack dog, using his insecurities about his working-class background, his fear of losing status, his desperate need for her approval. The violence was never random. It was Eleanor's violence, executed by Arthur's hands. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, there would be cameras, federal witnesses, a room full of Boston's elite with their phones ready to record any drama. The newest security footage from the main hall showed something interesting. The camera angles I'd requested captured not just the center of the room, but the corners where Eleanor typically stood during speeches. The audio pickup was studio quality, able to capture whispers from 30 feet away. If she whispered to Arthur tomorrow, when she whispered to Arthur tomorrow, it would be recorded. The trigger phrase, the command, the resulting violence. All documented with timestamp verification that would prove premeditation. I pulled up the criminal code on my laptop. Assault with conspiracy. Aggravated assault in front of witnesses. If Arthur touched me after Eleanor's command, it wouldn't just be family drama. It would be evidence of systematic abuse, captured in perfect clarity, automatically distributed to law enforcement before anyone could delete or deny. 20 years of conditioning had made Arthur a loaded gun. Tomorrow, Eleanor would pull the trigger, and the recoil would destroy them both. My phone lit up with an encrypted message from Hannah Green. Boston Society pages are buzzing about tomorrow. My editor cleared the entire front section. Whatever happens, we're ready. Hannah had been investigating the Jenkins for 2 years, following a tip about campaign finance violations that led her into a maze of shell companies and political payoffs. When Liam connected us 6 months ago, she nearly cried seeing my documentation. "This is Pulitzer material," she'd said, scanning through the evidence. But more importantly, this is justice. She wasn't alone. The network Liam had helped me build was extraordinary. 89 witnesses ready to testify, each with their own piece of the puzzle. There was Daniel Perez, former CFO of Jenkins Industries, who'd been forced out when he questioned suspicious transfers. He'd kept copies of everything, 10 years of double books showing 2 different realities, the one presented to investors and the real one. The USB drive he'd given me contained enough financial fraud to trigger a federal audit that would last years. Sofia Rodriguez, who'd been our housekeeper for 15 years, had documented every instance of abuse she'd witnessed. The locked rooms when I disappointed them, the meals withheld as punishment, the medications forced on me without prescriptions. Dr. Eric Jones, my pediatrician after the adoption, had meticulously kept notes about injuries that didn't match the explanations, behavioral changes that suggested trauma, requests from Eleanor to prescribe sedatives for a 4-year-old child. "I've waited 25 years to tell someone," he'd said when I approached him. But the most damaging witness would be Ethan Jenkins, Arthur's younger brother, who'd been cut out of the family business for asking too many questions. He had recordings from the 1990s, before I was even adopted, showing the pattern of financial manipulation and violence that defined the Jenkins empire. "They did it to me first," he'd told me. "Drained my trust fund, destroyed my reputation when I fought back. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to them." The FBI had interviewed 30 of these witnesses already, building their RICO case independently. Agent Reed had confirmed that morning, "We have enough to move forward, but your evidence is the keystone. It connects everything." The irony was beautiful. Eleanor and Arthur thought tomorrow's party would be my public humiliation, surrounded by their powerful friends who would witness my breakdown and support their commitment petition. Instead, they'd invited 127 potential witnesses to their own destruction. Judges who would have to recuse themselves from future proceedings. Politicians who would distance themselves from the scandal. Society figures who would provide detailed accounts of whatever violence occurred. They built the perfect stage for their own downfall, decorated it with flowers, and sent engraved invitations to watch it happen. The Jenkins Industries Board had one vulnerability they'd never imagined would matter, Section 14.3 of their corporate bylaws, which Arthur himself had insisted upon after a rival scandal in 2015. Any board member or executive who commits an act of violence at a company-affiliated event shall be subject to immediate termination without severance and shall forfeit all voting shares to the board's emergency trust. The birthday party, while personal, was being paid for by Jenkins Industries as a client entertainment expense. I had the receipts. $500,000 charged to corporate accounts, justified as relationship building with key stakeholders, by their own classification. Tomorrow was a company event. Liam had laughed when he found it. Arthur wrote his own professional death warrant. But there was more. 3 years ago, Arthur had been arrested for assault at a private club in Manhattan. Eleanor had made it disappear with money and connections, but the arrest record existed. The victim had signed an NDA in exchange for $2 million, my money, I discovered. But NDAs didn't apply to federal criminal investigations. A second arrest for assault would violate his pretrial diversion agreement. He'd face mandatory jail time. No negotiations possible. Then there was Eleanor's hidden weakness. She'd been building a case against Arthur for 2 years, preparing for a divorce that would let her take everything. I'd found her lawyer's files hidden in her study, photographs of Arthur with other women, records of hidden assets, even a psychological evaluation suggesting he was unfit to manage finances. She planned to trigger his violence tomorrow, document it, and use it as grounds for both divorce and corporate takeover. What she didn't know was that conspiracy to incite violence was a federal crime, especially when it resulted in assault. The security cameras would capture her whisper. The audio would record the trigger phrase. The timestamp would show Arthur's immediate reaction. Together, it would prove not just assault, but conspiracy, premeditation, and 20 years of conditioned abuse. The beautiful thing about narcissists, Liam had explained, is they document everything. They can't help themselves. Every victory must be recorded. Every manipulation must be perfected. He was right. Eleanor had kept journals, recordings, even videos of her training sessions with Arthur. She thought they were trophies. Tomorrow, they'd become evidence. My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Reed. Judge Sarah Kim signed off on surveillance warrants for tomorrow. Every federal agent in Boston knows what's happening. The moment Arthur touches you, we move. I pulled up the final piece, a contract Eleanor had signed last week, giving her power of attorney over Arthur in case of incapacitation. She'd been planning to have him committed after the assault, take control of everything. Instead, she'd documented her motive for conspiracy. Tomorrow at 8:47 p.m., when she whispered those 4 words, Eleanor would sign both their death warrants, and I would be the pen. The Jenkins ballroom had been transformed into what looked like a coronation hall. $500,000 had bought crystal chandeliers rented from the Met, orchids flown in from Thailand, and enough champagne to drown Boston's collective conscience. 127 guests arrived in waves of designer gowns and Swiss watches. Senator Bennett, fresh from blocking a healthcare bill, kissed Eleanor's cheek. Judge Maxwell, who'd ruled in favor of Jenkins Industries 6 times, admired the ice sculptures. CEO after CEO, all bound to the Jenkins by debt, favor, or blackmail, filled the room with nervous laughter. I stood in my 5-year-old blue dress, the one I'd worn to my Harvard Law graduation, before I knew what my family really was. Eleanor had chosen it deliberately, a reminder of when I'd been obedient, grateful, controllable. Aubrey. Eleanor's voice cut through the crowd. She wore a $50,000 Dior gown that screamed dominance. Come greet the Campbells. They're dying to hear about your little job. Mrs. Campbell, whose husband ran the state's largest development firm, looked at me with the kind of pity reserved for 3-legged dogs. Still at that small firm, dear? Eleanor mentioned you've been having difficulties, some transitions. I'm doing well, thank you, I replied carefully, feeling the weight of the recording device. Well, Mr. Campbell chuckled. Not everyone can handle real pressure. Good thing you have family to fall back on. The irony was so thick I could taste it. These people, who'd built empires on corruption and my stolen money, were discussing pressure while drinking champagne bought with blood. Dr. Hayes arrived at 7:30, making no effort to hide his purpose. He introduced himself to guests as a friend of the family, specializing in difficult cases. The commitment papers were probably in his briefcase, waiting for Eleanor's signal. Aubrey looks tired, he said loudly to Judge Maxwell. The stress of maintaining false narratives can be exhausting. Indeed, the judge replied, his eyes avoiding mine. Young people today face unique challenges. They were laying groundwork, creating witnesses to my supposed instability. Every conversation felt like testimony being prepared. At 8:15, Eleanor clinked her glass. The room fell silent. Before we toast to Aubrey's birthday, she began, her voice carrying perfectly, I want to share something about family. About charity. About the burdens we choose to carry. Arthur stood beside her, his jaw tight, hands clenched. He'd been drinking since 7, unusual for him. Eleanor had been pouring his drinks herself, each one stronger than the last. The cameras were rolling, the phones were recording, the stage was set. 25 years ago, Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with false warmth, Arthur and I made a decision that changed our lives. We took in a broken, traumatized child who had nothing. The crowd murmured appreciatively. I saw phones lifting, recording what they thought would be a heartwarming speech. Aubrey came to us damaged. Eleanor emphasized the word like driving a nail. For years old, covered in her parents' blood, unable to speak for months. The doctor said she might never recover. This was new. She'd never mentioned blood before. Never claimed I'd been unable to speak. She was rewriting history for her audience, painting me as more broken than I'd ever been. We spent millions on therapy, education, opportunities. Her eyes found mine across the room. Harvard wasn't cheap. Neither were the mistakes along the way. Mistakes? Senator Bennett asked, playing his part. Oh, the broken items, the tantrums, the incidents. Eleanor sighed dramatically. Raising someone else's child is the ultimate charity, but it requires infinite patience. Arthur shifted beside her, his face flushed from alcohol and building rage. His eyes kept darting to me, then away, like he was fighting something inside himself. Some people, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening no matter how much you give them, remain fundamentally ungrateful. They bite the hand that feeds them. They spread lies about those who save them. The room's atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a toast. It was a public execution. We've recently discovered that Aubrey has been making disturbing accusations about our family, Eleanor announced. Paranoid fantasies about stolen money, conspiracies, abuse that never happened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Hayes stepped forward slightly, ready to play his role as the concerned psychiatrist. It breaks our hearts, Arthur slurred, the alcohol thick in his voice. After everything we've done. Which is why, Eleanor's voice became steel, we've made the difficult decision that Aubrey needs professional help. Real help. The kind that requires commitment. The word hung in the air. Everyone understood what she meant. But first, she raised her glass. Let's toast the birthday girl. Aubrey, come here. It wasn't a request. 127 pairs of eyes turned to me, waiting to see if I'd comply. The cameras kept rolling. The recordings continued. I walked forward, each step measured, my phone heavy in my pocket, the accelerometer armed and ready. That's a good girl, Eleanor purred as I approached. Always best to know your place. Arthur's breathing was audible now, harsh and rapid. His hands trembled. Eleanor leaned close to him, her lips barely moving. I saw her mouth form the words, "This is it." The moment everything changes. What do you think happens when a narcissist's perfect plan backfires in front of everyone they're trying to impress? Drop your prediction in the comments below. If you're holding your breath right now, imagine how I felt standing there. Remember your duty, Arthur. The words were barely a whisper, but the microphones I'd planted caught them perfectly. Eleanor's lips brushed his ear, her hands squeezing his arm at the exact pressure point she'd trained him to respond to. The change in Arthur was instant. His pupils dilated, his breathing stopped for a second, then resumed in sharp, ragged bursts. 20 years of conditioning took over, bypassing conscious thought. His hand came up fast, catching me in the chest with enough force to send me backwards. My heel caught on the edge of the marble floor. Time slowed as I fell, the chandelier lights spinning overhead like dying stars. I hit the cold marble hard. Pain shot through my shoulder, my hip, my head. Blood filled my mouth where I'd bitten my lip. My dress tore along the seam, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The room exploded in gasps, screams, the crash of dropped champagne flutes. 127 of Boston's most powerful people had just witnessed assault. But I didn't get up. I lay there for 5 long seconds, feeling my phone vibrate against my ribs. The accelerometer had triggered. 1,147 pages of evidence were uploading. 234 audio files were being distributed. 89 witnesses were being notified. Then, lying on that cold floor with blood on my lips and my adoptive parents standing over me like conquering heroes, I did something they'd never expected. I laughed. It started low, a chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my chest. Then it grew, becoming something rich and dark and absolutely certain. Ha ha ha. Each sound deliberate, measured. Finally. You finally did it. Eleanor's face went utterly white. Arthur stumbled backward, the fog of conditioning clearing as he realized what he'd done. What? Eleanor started. Check your phones, I said, still lying there, blood dripping onto the pristine white marble. All of you. Check them now. The notifications were already starting. Pings and buzzes filling the room as every guest received something, a news alert, a social media tag, an email marked urgent. What did you do? Eleanor's voice cracked, losing its steel. I smiled up at her. This woman who'd stolen my childhood, my money, my identity. This woman who'd trained her husband like an attack dog and set him loose on a room full of witnesses. I didn't do anything, I said, finally sitting up, my phone still recording everything. You did. And everyone just watched. The first scream came from Senator Bennett's wife, staring at her phone in horror. The dominoes had started falling. I stood slowly, deliberately, brushing marble dust from my torn dress. Blood still trickled from my lip, and I let it. Every camera in the room was on me now, phones, security feeds, and the news crew that Hannah Green had cleverly snuck in as event photographers. Thank you, Arthur, I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. You just gave me exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, showing the screen to the room. Emergency protocols activated. Files transmitted to 47 recipients. You're insane, Eleanor hissed. Dr. Hayes, she's having an episode. No, I interrupted, my gaze fixed on the trembling doctor. But you might want to check your email, doctor. The Massachusetts Medical Board just received an interesting package about pre-signed commitment papers for a patient you've never examined. Dr. Hayes's phone chimed. His face went gray as he read. 15 news organizations just received 1,147 pages of documentation, I announced, walking toward the projection screen Eleanor had used for her speech. Financial records, forged signatures, shell companies, money laundering through campaign donations. I connected my phone to the screen. The first document appeared, a bank transfer authorization with my forged signature, dated when I was 12 years old. That's fabricated. Arthur stammered. Is it? I swiped to the next image. This is from Jenkins Industries' internal audit. Your own CFO documented it before you fired him. Daniel, would you like to comment? Daniel Perez stepped out from behind a pillar where he'd been waiting, his face grim. Every word she's saying is true. I have 10 years of records proving systematic theft. The room erupted. Senator Bennett was already heading for the door, but found FBI agents blocking his path. Oh, did I mention? I continued, my voice steady despite the pain. The FBI has been watching this party. Agent Reed, I believe you have something to say. Olivia Reed entered with 6 other agents, her badge gleaming. Arthur Jenkins, you're under arrest for assault. Eleanor Jenkins, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act. This is ridiculous. Eleanor shrieked. We're her parents. We saved her. No, I said, swiping to the next document. The real police report from my parents' accident. You killed them. This is the toxicology report showing my father was drugged before the crash. The same sedatives you've been giving me for 20 years. The prescription in your name, Eleanor. The silence was absolute. Every transaction, every forged document, every crime, it's all being published as we speak. I looked at the crowd of complicit elite, including the names of everyone who benefited. Phones began ringing frantically, lawyers being called, PR teams being awakened. The empire was crumbling, and everyone could hear it fall. The projection screen lit up with a web of financial transactions that looked like a spider's web made of numbers. Each strand led back to my trust fund, and each connection had a name attached. $47 million, I announced, zooming in on the total stolen over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. But that's not the interesting part. I clicked to the next slide. Beacon Holdings, LLC. That's you, Senator Bennett. $2.3 million for consulting services that never existed. Bennett's wife was pulling at his arm, trying to leave, but the FBI agents weren't moving. Heritage Investment Partners, Judge Maxwell. That's your vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, bought with my inheritance. The same money you used to rule in Jenkins Industries' favor 6 times. Maxwell dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. Should I continue? I asked, swiping through more documents. There are 12 shell companies, 3 senators, 2 federal judges, 1 governor's chief of staff, all funded by a murdered couple's orphan daughter. Eleanor lunged toward me, but Agent Reed caught her arm. I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Jenkins. These are lies. Eleanor screamed. Photoshopped. Fabricated. Actually, Hannah Green stepped forward, her press badge now visible. The Wall Street Journal has been independently verifying these documents for 6 months. Our forensic accountants confirmed every transaction. The story goes live in, she checked her phone, 3 minutes. I switched to the next slide. Screenshots of Eleanor's emails. Let's talk about the murders, Eleanor. These are your emails to Dr. Charles Grant, discussing the problem of my parents' life insurance policy. The one that named their daughter sole beneficiary. The policy you couldn't touch unless they died and you became my guardian. The room was chaos now. Some guests were crying. Others were on phones with lawyers. Senator Campbell's wife had fainted. But here's my favorite, I said, pulling up the final document. This is from yesterday. Eleanor's divorce lawyer's files. She's been planning to frame Arthur for everything, take over Jenkins Industries, and have him committed. Arthur turned to Eleanor, his face a mask of betrayal. You were going to. Shut up, she snapped at him, the mask fully gone now. You weak, pathetic, please continue, Agent Reed said, recording everything. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The hunters had become the hunted, and there was nowhere left to run. Agent Reed stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. Arthur Jenkins, you're under arrest for assault and battery, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act. 2 agents moved in, handcuffs gleaming under the chandeliers. Arthur didn't resist. He seemed almost relieved as the metal clicked around his wrists. Eleanor Jenkins, Reed continued. You're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and murder in the first degree of Emily and William Brennan. Murder. The word rippled through the crowd. The toxicology reports Miss Thompson provided, combined with your documented purchase of the same sedatives, constitute probable cause. You'll be held without bail pending trial. As the handcuffs touched Eleanor's wrists, her phone rang. She couldn't answer it, but I recognized the ring-tone, the board of directors' emergency line. Liam answered his own phone, listened, then announced, the Jenkins Industries board has convened an emergency session. Effective immediately, Arthur Jenkins is terminated for cause under Section 14.3 of the corporate bylaws, violence at a company event. All voting shares are transferred to the emergency trust. No, Arthur shouted. This is my company. My father's company, Liam corrected. The board has also voted to freeze all corporate accounts pending federal investigation. Eleanor's signing authority is revoked. Another phone rang. Senator Bennett's. His aide answered, went pale, and whispered urgently in his ear. What do you mean? The Times has everything. Bennett hissed. More phones, more panic. The dominoes weren't just falling. They were creating an avalanche. Hannah Green held up her phone, showing a rapidly climbing number. The video of Arthur pushing Aubrey has been viewed 2.3 million times in the last 10 minutes. #Jenkins assault is trending worldwide. The stock market opens in Asia in 2 hours, someone whispered. Jenkins Industries will be worthless by morning. 3 federal judges in attendance had already recused themselves from any future proceedings. 12 board members from various companies were resigning via email. The Massachusetts Attorney General was announcing a widespread corruption probe. Your parents' estate will be fully restored, Judge Sarah Kim told me. With interest and penalties, you're looking at approximately $127 million. But I wasn't looking at the money. I was watching Eleanor's face as she realized her entire world built on my parents' bodies and my stolen childhood was collapsing in real time. This isn't over, she hissed at me as agents led her away. You're right, I replied. This is just the beginning. The trial will be spectacular. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a sound like the ceiling of a tomb. Within an hour, the Jenkins empire collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Bloomberg broke the news at 9:04 p.m. Jenkins Industries stock futures plummet 40% on fraud allegations. By 10:15, it was down 60%. Trading was halted, but everyone knew it was too late. 8 major partners canceled contracts via emergency conference calls. Westfield Development pulled their $200 million project. Boston General Hospital ended their pharmaceutical partnership. Even the country club, the one Arthur's grandfather had founded, revoked the family membership. Eleanor's phone, now in FBI custody, received 47 emails in 30 minutes. Each one another resignation, another severed tie, another ally jumping ship. The subject lines told the story. Effective immediately. Termination of relationship. Cease all contact, please. Eleanor tried one last manipulation as agents led her past me. We can make a deal. I have information about the others. Bennett, Maxwell, everyone. I'll testify. The FBI already has everything they need, Agent Reed informed her. Miss Thompson's evidence is comprehensive. Arthur looked at me with something like clarity for the first time in years. The conditioning, he said quietly. You knew about the conditioning. I documented everything, Arthur. Every trigger, every response. Your therapy records will help in your defense. Eleanor's manipulation might get you reduced charges. I'm sorry, he said, and for a moment, I saw the man he might have been without Eleanor's poison. I'm so sorry. But apologies couldn't undo 25 years. They couldn't bring back my parents or return my stolen childhood. The guests were fleeing now, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Senator Bennett was on the phone with his lawyer, his wife crying beside him. Judge Maxwell had already left, but reporters were waiting outside. The Campbells were trying to leave through the service entrance, only to find more photographers. Miss Thompson, Agent Reed approached me. We'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow for a full deposition. I'll be there at 8 a.m., I confirmed. The ballroom, which had been so perfectly arranged for my humiliation, was now a crime scene. Yellow tape was being strung up. Evidence markers placed. The ice sculptures were melting, champagne going flat. Eleanor's careful stage direction destroyed. The kingdom hadn't just fallen. It had been obliterated. By midnight, the court had issued emergency orders. I stood in the same ballroom, now empty except for FBI agents and my legal team, as Judge Sarah Kim made it official. Given the evidence of systematic theft and fraud, this court appoints Aubrey Thompson as temporary administrator of all disputed assets. Effective immediately. Liam handed me a folder. The family accounts are frozen, except for your access. The houses, the cars, the investments. You control everything while the criminal cases proceed. The board wants to meet with you Monday, another lawyer added. They're hoping you'll consider taking Arthur's position, at least temporarily. I almost laughed. The same board that had ignored my existence for 25 years now wanted me to save their company? I'll meet with them, I said, but on my terms. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Miss Thompson, this is Jessica Price from Cromwell and Associates. We'd like to offer you a senior partnership. Name your salary. I declined. For more firms called in the next 10 minutes, each offer more desperate than the last. What will you do? Liam asked. Start my own firm, I decided. Specializing in financial fraud and family abuse cases. Pro bono for those who can't afford it. Hannah Green was typing furiously. Can I quote you on that? Quote this. The Jenkins name is about to mean something different. Something better. I walked through the ruined ballroom, my heels clicking on marble now marked with evidence tags. The portrait of Arthur's grandfather watched from the wall. Another tyrant who'd built wealth on others' misery. Take it down, I told the federal agents. Take them all down. My phone showed 200 messages, interview requests, book deals, documentary offers. But also something else. Messages from other victims, other adopted individuals, other survivors, other people who'd been crushed by powerful families. You gave us hope, one read. You showed us it's possible to fight back. That was worth more than the $127 million the court would restore, worth more than the companies begging to hire me, worth more than Eleanor's empire. I'd taken back more than money or status. I'd taken back my story. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in social destruction. Eleanor's carefully curated image disintegrated across every platform. The 12 charity boards she dominated for decades held emergency meetings. She was removed from each one within hours. The Boston Society Register, which had featured the Jenkins for 6 generations, struck their name from the rolls. The Met Gala Committee, the Symphony Board, the Museum of Fine Arts, every institution that had courted Jenkins' money now treated the name like poison. Jenkins Industries loses $2.1 billion in market value, the Financial Times reported. The stock had dropped 78% before trading was suspended indefinitely. Shareholders were filing class action lawsuits. The SEC announced a decade-long audit going back to when Arthur's father ran the company. But the real devastation came from the witnesses. All 89 of them went public within days, giving interviews, sharing documentation, posting evidence on social media. Sofia Rodriguez appeared on 60 Minutes, showing photographs of a 4-year-old me locked in a closet for crying about my dead parents. Dr. Eric Jones published his medical notes in the New England Journal of Medicine, sparking a national conversation about mandatory reporting laws. Ethan Jenkins, Arthur's brother, held his own press conference. This family has been corrupt for 3 generations. My father, Arthur's father, built this empire on fraud. I have documents going back to the 1960s. The political fallout was swift and brutal. Senator Bennett resigned to focus on his legal defense. Senator Campbell withdrew from his re-election campaign. Senator Peterson was expelled from 3 committees pending investigation. Judge Maxwell took early retirement, his legacy destroyed overnight. Judge Harrison fled to his non-extradition home in Switzerland, abandoning his federal pension rather than face charges. The Boston Globe published a series called The Jenkins Web, mapping every connection, every payoff, every crime. It would win a Pulitzer, but more importantly, it triggered investigations into 15 other wealthy families suspected of similar crimes. This is bigger than just the Jenkins, the Massachusetts Attorney General announced. We're looking at systematic corruption among Boston's elite spanning decades. My phone showed the numbers. 234 audio files had been played 50 million times across various platforms. The video of Arthur pushing me had reached 100 million views. #JusticeForAubrey had generated 2 billion impressions. But the number that mattered most was 47, the number of abuse survivors who'd reached out, saying my story gave them the courage to pursue their own justice. You didn't just destroy them, Liam told me as we watched the news coverage. You started a revolution. Eleanor and Arthur would face trial in 6 months. Federal prosecutors were seeking 20 years for Arthur, life for Eleanor, given the murder charges. Their lawyers were already discussing plea deals, but the FBI wasn't interested in negotiation. The empire hadn't just fallen. It had been erased from history, except as a cautionary tale. The ripples spread far beyond Boston. 3 state senators from Connecticut, New York, and Rhode Island announced sudden resignations after journalists connected them to Jenkins' money. A federal investigation called Operation Broken Trust expanded to include 43 politicians across New England. The FBI established a dedicated task force with 50 agents working full-time on cases stemming from my evidence. Massachusetts passed Aubrey's Law in an emergency session, the strongest protection for adopted children in the nation. It required quarterly welfare checks, independent financial audits, and mandatory reporting of any signs of abuse. 7 other states announced similar legislation within a week. The documentary offers kept coming, but it was the call from Samantha Reed that stopped me cold. She was 17, living with adoptive parents in Chicago who'd been draining her trust fund. Your story saved my life, she said through tears. I showed your video to my teacher. She called the police. They found everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, all of it. By week's end, I heard from 200 similar cases. Liam helped me establish the Brennan Foundation, named for my biological parents. With initial funding of $10 million from the recovered assets, we would provide free legal services to adopted and foster children facing financial exploitation. Jenkins Industries, meanwhile, was being dissected and sold piece by piece. The board begged me to take over, to save what could be saved. I agreed to one meeting. You want me to save a company built on blood money? I asked the 12 board members who'd enabled Arthur for years. The same company that funded my abuse? The employees, the interim CEO pleaded. 3,000 people who had nothing to do with this. That was the leverage they thought they had. But I'd already thought of that. I'll buy the company, I announced, for $1. In exchange, I'll guarantee all employee pensions and jobs for 2 years while we restructure. But the Jenkins name dies today. The company will be rebuilt as Brennan Industries, and 50% of profits will go to victims of financial abuse. They had no choice. The company was worthless without my intervention, and they knew it. The sale was finalized in 72 hours. The first act of Brennan Industries was to establish a $100 million victim compensation fund. The second was to fire every executive who'd been complicit in the Jenkins crimes. From the ashes, Hannah Green wrote in her follow-up story, Aubrey Thompson has built something unprecedented. justice that pays dividends. But the real change was in the hundreds of messages flooding in daily. Survivors finding courage, lawyers offering pro bono help, journalists investigating similar cases. One message stood out. From a federal prosecutor, "You've given us a template to take down corrupt dynasties nationwide." The Jenkins case is now required reading at Quantico. The revolution wasn't just starting. It was spreading like wildfire. The cease and desist letter was hand-delivered to Eleanor in federal detention and to Arthur at the minimum security facility where he awaited trial. No contact for 5 years, I'd instructed Liam. After that, only through legal counsel. No letters, no calls, no messages through third parties. Any violation will result in additional charges. Eleanor had tried to write me from jail. 7 letters in the first week, oscillating between threats and manipulation. "You'll regret this. I'm still your mother. We can work this out." Each one was returned unopened and filed as evidence of harassment. Arthur sent only one letter, which my lawyer summarized for me, an apology and a request to testify against Eleanor in exchange for my forgiveness. I declined both. His apology meant nothing without consequences, and forgiveness wasn't mine to give. It belonged to my dead parents. But boundaries weren't just about them. I had to rebuild my entire life outside their shadow. I moved from the Beacon Hill mansion to a $3.5 million penthouse downtown, paid for with my own money, chosen for its floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light the Jenkins house had always blocked. The old mansion was being converted into a shelter for abuse survivors. Every dark room transformed into something healing. "You could have kept it," Liam said during the renovation planning. "Some places are too poisonous to save," I replied. "Better to let them become something else entirely." The Brennan Foundation's headquarters occupied the top floor of my new building. Glass walls, open spaces, nothing hidden. We established strict protocols, financial transparency reports published quarterly, independent audits, a survivor board of directors. Everything the Jenkins had hidden, we made visible. I hired Sofia Rodriguez as the Foundation's head of survivor services. She knew better than anyone what to look for, what questions to ask. Dr. Eric Jones joined our medical advisory board. Ethan Jenkins, Arthur's brother, donated his entire inheritance to the cause. "Boundaries aren't walls," I told the Boston Globe in my first major interview. "They're definitions. This is who I am. This is what I'll accept. This is what I won't." The interview went viral, particularly one quote. "For 25 years, I was told that family means accepting abuse. But real family, chosen or biological, means respect. It means safety. It means love without conditions or manipulation." Support groups started using my interview as required reading. Therapists quoted it in sessions. Universities added it to their social work curricula. But the most important boundary was internal. Every morning I looked in the mirror and reminded myself, you are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to become. Despite them, the Jenkins had tried to make me nothing. Instead, I'd become everything they feared, independent, powerful, and absolutely beyond their control. 1 year later, I stood in the offices of Brennan Legal. My firm had generated $10 million in revenue while taking 60% of cases pro bono. We'd helped 47 families recover stolen assets, removed 23 children from abusive situations, and put 12 perpetrators behind bars. "The Times wants to know if you'll comment on the verdicts," my assistant informed me. Eleanor had been sentenced to life, without parole for the murders of my parents, plus 45 years for financial crimes. She'd aged a decade in a year, her designer facade crumbling into something hollow and bitter. Arthur got 12 years with the possibility of parole in 7. The jury had accepted that Eleanor's psychological manipulation was a mitigating factor, though not an excuse. No comment, I decided. The verdicts speak for themselves. My book, Blood Money, a memoir of survival, had spent 30 weeks on the bestseller list. Every penny of the $5 million advance went to the foundation. The documentary had won 3 Emmys. The podcast series had 50 million downloads. But none of that was about me anymore. It was about the movement we'd started. "You have a visitor," my assistant added. "Says she's from Seattle." The woman was 35, professionally dressed, but with tired eyes. I recognized another survivor. My adoptive parents run a tech company, she began. They've been stealing my patents, claiming my work is theirs. I have evidence, but no one believes me because they're so respected. We believe you, I said simply. Let's look at your evidence. 3 hours later, we had a case. Another empire would fall. Another survivor would reclaim their story. That evening, I walked through Boston Common, the same park where Eleanor used to parade me like a prize poodle. Parents played with their children. Real families, built on love, not leverage. A teenage girl recognized me, whispered to her mother, then approached nervously. Miss Thompson, I mean, Miss Brennan, I'm adopted, too, and my parents are amazing. But I wanted to thank you. You made it safer for all of us. That was the real victory. Not the money recovered or the criminals jailed, but the systemic change. Adoption agencies had implemented new safeguards. Courts had established oversight protocols. Laws had been rewritten. As I stood in my penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights, I thought about my biological parents. Emily and William Brennan, who died when I was 4, but somehow left me everything I needed. Not just money, but evidence of their love. Proof that I'd been wanted, chosen, cherished. The Jenkins had tried to erase them, to make me forget I'd ever been loved properly. They'd failed. Sometimes you have to fall all the way to the ground to realize you were always meant to fly. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's really yours. Sometimes you have to laugh in the face of evil to remember that you're good. My story ends here, but yours might be just beginning. If you're trapped in a toxic situation, remember, evidence is power, boundaries are your right, and truth always finds a way. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you faced a similar battle for truth against powerful odds? Share your experience in the comments below. Your perspective is incredibly important, and we can learn so much from each other.